Unless PJ Walker turned things around quickly, he's in real danger of Tyson Bagent taking his job as the Chicago Bears' top backup quarterback.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. Join the Locked On Bears subtext group for extra Chicago Bears analysis. And make sure you're subscribed to the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month today. On the show today, we recap the Chicago Bears' preseason loss to the Indianapolis Colts, starting with the quarterback controversy, the backup quarterback controversy, another big struggle from PJ Walker, more progress from Tyson Bagent, and all of a sudden, that's a real battle with some real potential consequences for both players. We'll kind of check in on how much we should trust what we've seen so far versus the larger track record of both players. We'll check in on these Bears, especially the rookie defensive linemen, but some other defensive linemen as well, as we look for progress from Zacch Pickens, Gervon Dexter, Terrell Lewis, Travis Gibson in that conversation. And then we'll also circle around to the offensive line depth, where we didn't see any starters, and I think there was a collective step back from what we had seen from that group compared to the previous preseason game against the Tennessee Titans. But let's start with the quarterbacks here, because I don't think we expected to have quite this level of quarterback controversy to start this preseason game. Not only does Tyson Bagent get in the game before Nathan Peterman, but comes in and plays really, really well after PJ Walker struggled once again. And we're at the point now where the Bears absolutely have to give Tyson Bagent every opportunity to win this number 2 starting job. Matt Eberflus didn't say it outright after the game, but kind of like hinted that, hey, no one's job is safe here and that everyone is playing for their competition. Like implying that PJ Walker's not guaranteed anything. That number 2 spot is always going to be open. And Nathan Peterman played pretty well, too. Had a really impressive downfield touchdown and made a couple other nice throws in there. But Bagent was really the star and the story of the game. 9 of 10 for 76 yards passing, plus a 2-yard rushing touchdown to cap off what was like a 90-yard drive. They ended up driving down the length of the field and really was like in command, in control, operating the offense effectively. Now we need to always remember preseason game going against backups, but he absolutely did everything the Bears asked him to do. He executed the offense at a high level. And I think comparatively, PJ Walker also preseason game against mostly backups, and he went 1 of 4 for 6 yards and took a sack or 2 that he shouldn't have. And really, the offense just was not operating very effectively when he was in there. And it wasn't as though, the Colts swapped out a bunch of different personnel when Bagent came in. Sure, they were always rotating guys, but it wasn't like all the starters were there against Walker and then all the starters came out and it was all backups against Bagent. They were in largely similar situations, or at least opponents, in terms of who the Colts were putting on the field, and it was Bagent who was much more effectively able to work the ball down the field, not only literally throwing the ball down the field, but bring the offense down the field. Benefited from some nice running from Roschon Johnson on that drive, who also I think continues to play really well this preseason. But there was something about the way Bagent looked comfortable and controlled at the line of scrimmage that really didn't feel like an undrafted rookie free agent quarterback. I mean, he was poised. He made difficult throws, right? His 9 of 10 wasn't just 3 screen passes for 160 yards or whatever Justin Fields had last week. This was asking more of the quarterback in those situations to hit a difficult couple. He had a really nice slant in the red zone where it was tight coverage and got it in front of the cornerback, but before the safety could get there, to hit a nice window, had a nice, roll out of the pocket and hit a receiver right at the sideline. A couple of nice throws over the middle of the field into tight coverage that really struck me as particularly impressive from an undrafted rookie free agent adjusting from Division II. Now, I think when you go back and watch that game, the play calls for Bagent were very basic West Coast offense principles. These were not super complicated reads and asking the quarterback to do super complicated things, but this is the preseason, right? You're not expecting them to. And the fact that he was able to hit tight windows and make difficult throws within that, these are not just wide open players that are easy pitch and catch. These were more difficult throws. And even if they were wide open players, we weren't seeing PJ Walker be able to take advantage of those opportunities. And that's really ultimately what a lot of this comes down to. Now, I will still say it was only 10 passes of Tyson Bagent. It's very good 10 passes, but only 10 passes is not a very large sample size. And we've still only seen, 4 PJ Walker throws in this game, 8 in the other game, 12 pass attempts, plus, a handful of other passing plays. These are still very small sample sizes. The Bears are not going to make their backup quarterback decision based purely on 12 throws from Walker and, these 10 throws from Bagent plus the previous 10 throws. There's going to be the evaluation at practice, the evaluation in the third preseason game as well. But we've seen, a lot more of PJ Walker in the pros. We've seen him play well. We've seen him struggle. Whereas Bagent is still a guy who is a relative unknown. And I'm of the belief that, Bagent has the more unknown ceiling there and has more you can tap into. So that's the kind of guy I would prefer to give the opportunity to. I still think you're in a position where they may be able to either get away with making Bagent the practice squad quarterback, or at the very least, you could still keep him as the number 3 quarterback and still keep PJ Walker as a guy who has a little more experience in that room. It doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other. I also still think practice squad is not out of the question here. He's played very, very well, but another team would have to roster him to keep him off the practice squad, and I don't know that teams are going to be ready to do that just yet based on a couple of preseason games, but perhaps the third preseason game next week can really hammer that home for Tyson Bagent. We're going to break down Tyson Bagent's film in depth for the Locked On Bears subtext group, putting together a film video breakdown where I draw and annotate and narrate and talk over the play, break down the coverage, the route, the read, the throw for Tyson Bagent's big touchdown drive. We're going to go play by play through what he was able to do. It's only available for members of the Locked On Bears subtext group. It's an extra thing separate from the podcast, beyond the podcast. It's $4.99 a month, $5, and it gets you access to all 22 film breakdowns, full games of all 22 film of the Chicago Bears, data and charting from this season coming up, but certainly a lot of stuff from last season, goodies in there, and also a direct line to text me. So in order to join, you got to go to joinsubtext.com/lockedonbears. You text in, get you that access, and then we'll get you into the Google Drive and all sorts of good stuff. Joinsubtext.com/lockedonbears for a Tyson Bagent breakdown to go with our Travis Gibson breakdown from last week. Got a Khalil Herbert breakdown in there and more to come all throughout the season. Go check it out. Joinsubtext.com/lockedonbears. May have to do some more defensive line breakdowns in there in the coming weeks as we see more progress from Zacch, Pickens, and Gervon, Dexter. We'll kind of go through what we saw from them, where they got better, where they still need to improve against the Indianapolis Colts. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by BetterHelp. And BetterHelp is here to help you connect with a therapist online to take care of your mental health. If you're thinking about starting therapy, BetterHelp is a great place to start because it's entirely online. It's super convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. I do online therapy every single week. Once a week, I meet with a therapist online. It's a really important part of my mental health regimen. I always like to say, just like you go to the gym to take care of your physical health, not because your body's broken, but just because you want to take care of your health. The same thing is true for therapy. You don't have to be in a crisis to get help and benefit from therapy. It's a part of taking care of your brain, your mental health, and being the best version of yourself. With BetterHelp, you just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, but they make it really easy that if the first therapist you get isn't what you're quite looking for, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We're seeing progress game to game, week to week from the Chicago Bears rookie defensive tackles in particular, Zacch Pickens and Gervon Dexter. But I also think this preseason has been big for guys like Terrell Lewis and Trevis Gibson, who are also going to be part of this conversation. But I want to start with the rookie defensive tackles because we knew Dexter especially, but both players need some development, right? Need to adjust their game to the pro style and need to refine their technique, their use of their hands, well, especially for Dexter, the pad level. And this game felt like progress in that regard. It wasn't like, oh, everything is fixed and now they're perfect studs that are going to be great all season. No, but steps forward from where we saw from the previous game. You know, against the Titans in preseason week 1, Gervon Dexter, he would get out of his stance and just stand straight up, right? He wouldn't go forward and low into the blocker. He would like stand up, then approach the blocker and always end up coming in with really high pad level. It just wasn't a natural release. We saw him improve in that area somewhat. Like I think he did a better job of coming out lower more often, attacking more often. I think especially, using his length really well, getting his arms fully extended because he has good long arms, longer arms than a lot of the interior offensive linemen that he goes against out there, to be able to then like keep himself a little bit more free, generate a little bit more force, because when he's got his arms extended, he has to be a little bit lower to get them in the right place. So then I think you get more leverage like through his legs, through his core, and then up through his arms to push linemen back. It felt like both he and Zacch Pickens, especially in the pass rush, like did a better job of pushing back the line of scrimmage. They weren't necessarily, driving the guard in the center into the quarterback's lap all the time or anything, but at least like shrinking the top of the pocket somewhat for the quarterback so there wasn't as much room to step up when the edge guys started to get home. Same thing in the running game. Like I think they'd get a good pop off of their stance, like off of the snap, to kind of push that line back a little bit. It wasn't as though every time they were, knifing into the backfield and making a big tackle for loss, although Zacch Pickens did have one of those, and I was quite impressed with what he was able to do in this game. I think he's really coming along nicely so far. But Dexter, too, like was able to hold firm in there and really control the line of scrimmage a little bit more. The problem was, I felt like with Dexter, there were a couple times where, like off the snap, he would get under the, he'd be in a good spot and good technique, and he would push that line of scrimmage back a little bit. But then he struggled to like disengage from the block and actually get to his gap into the ball carrier. Like there were a couple times there where it's like, okay, maybe he's supposed to be like outside of the guard, to make sure that that B gap doesn't have the back coming through, and like he pushes him back and is like engaged with him and is clearly like seemingly in control of the line of scrimmage there, but then the back still ends up getting through his B gap because he can't quite get off of his block to get, his arm into the gap or to fill the gap, so the back has to cut somewhere else. Like he couldn't maintain the control of his gap despite initially winning off the snap and seeming to, to get a good push on the line of scrimmage and kind of control that way a little bit more. It's being able to sort of then take the next step to finish and make those plays that you'd like to see a little bit more progress from him. I thought Pickens did a much better job in this game, too, of taking on double teams and just holding firm, even though he's not, you're not expecting him to split the guys and, take down two blockers at once, but just hold that spot and leave the linebackers room behind him to run free. Absolutely saw more and better of that from Pickens in this game. At defensive end, Terrell Lewis, back-to-back games with a strip sack. It's one play in each game, but one huge play in each game, and it's going to weigh a lot when the Bears are trying to decide how many of these defensive ends to keep. I don't know that he did much else in terms of like generating a lot of pressure in this game, but he didn't even play as much, relatively speaking. They really let the undrafted free agent guys, D'Anthony Jones and Andrew Brown and some others, get a little more extended playing time in there. But I still think Terrell Lewis continues to make a case to make this 53-man roster. Trevis Gibson, just Sanborn's name was right next to him on my list. Trevis Gibson wasn't quite the bat out of hell in this game that he looked like in the previous game, but he still played well. Like he didn't have a sack, but he hit the quarterback at least once, like, especially in that fourth quarter. He got a couple of pressures in there too. Like he was still playing well, and I think still demanding to make this 53-man roster. And I really keep finding myself feeling like Rasheem Green is the guy who's just done close to nothing in this preseason. He hasn't played that much. They play him with the starters and then take him out, which would indicate he's probably pretty safe. But it just doesn't seem like he's earned much at this point, whereas guys like Lewis and Gibson are playing hard, and Robinson, I think, has flashed a little bit here and there. So, I mean, to me, I can't justify keeping Green and cutting either Gibson or Lewis, but I could justify keeping all of them. Like, if you want to keep 5 defensive ends and go Walker, Ngakwe, Robinson, Green, Gibson, and Lewis would be 6 defensive ends as I count them out loud. Like, it just, to me, it would be really hard to cut Lewis and keep Green, or cut Gibson and keep Green, because those guys have been playing better than he has. And Lewis is not on guaranteed money. He doesn't have like a ton of proven career production by any means. Like, he's a guy they clearly went after and had an interest in early on, but you know, you got to earn it at training camp and in the preseason. And he just has not really been able to do that up to this point. And maybe practice has been better. Maybe that's where we're not seeing, but in the games just has not been all that consistent in a way that I think is disappointing. And you're hoping to kind of see more from him throughout this process. But so far it's been really the show from everybody else on that defensive line, and not as much him. Especially, I thought, with the starters not playing at all in this game, a little more extended time for him would have made a lot of sense. But we still got to see plenty of the rookies, plenty of the other young guys getting in the rotation there. And it's been good to kind of see some of the progress from those guys as well. I was surprised we didn't see Darnell Wright as far as rookies getting some playing time. Didn't see Tyler Scott. Velus Jones, I think, dealing with an injury, but we didn't get to see Velus Jones either. So I was a little bit surprised that some of the other younger guys didn't get some extended playing time in this game, but it did give more time for this backup Chicago Bears offensive line that played really well against the Tennessee Titans, but I don't think quite showed out the same way against the Colts. So we'll check in how the depth is doing on that side of the trenches next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, FanDuel is going to give you bonus bet every time that team wins in the regular season. So you pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and anytime that team wins, you're getting bonus bets for every victory they have. You can then take those bonus bets and use them on spreads, player props, over-unders. And even if you don't pick the Bears as that Super Bowl team, you can take those bonus bets and use those on Bears games. There's lines already for Week 1 Bears-Packers. You can bet on Justin Fields' MVP odds, Matt Eberflus's Coach of the Year odds, and so much more, all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to download. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Last week against the Tennessee Titans, it felt like this Bears backup offensive line was dialed in, right? We saw Ja'Tyre Carter start at right guard and play pretty well. A couple screen passes there. We saw a couple other guys, like Doug Kramer come in and play well. And to me, it felt like against the Colts, a step back to the mean, back towards a little bit more of, I think, what we were expecting early on. This is a backup offensive line that varies in experience and reliability, and that was more, I think, of what we saw against the Colts compared to what we saw against the Tennessee Titans. I think first and foremost, Larry Borum's dialed in. Larry Borum's playing well. He was of the backup linemen who, again, started this game, but backups on the depth chart. He was the one who I was most impressed with. He's been consistent through both of these games. He's the one who he's locked in this 53-man roster, if you ask me. He is the swing tackle, right? You're starting Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright. Larry Borum's number 3. That seems pretty clear at this point. They played him at both left and right tackle in this game. He played both fairly well in this game. I think you're feeling pretty good about Larry Borum as your number 3 tackle, and a guy who has played guard before as well in a pinch if you need him to kick inside, but settling in very nicely at tackle so far this preseason. The rest of the backup offensive line, varying degrees of concern, I think. Alex Leatherwood, for example, at left guard, to me, still has not really looked playable in the regular season. Right? He's been a project, a guy they claimed on waivers last season to try and develop. Not seeing nearly as much development as you'd like to see. It's still sloppy. It's not really coordinated well, upper body and lower body, right? Still kind of lunging, still kind of reaching off balance a lot, overruns guys. The feet move really, really well, but then they go too far and he doesn't keep still and he doesn't anchor very well. And it's sloppy and it feels like it's not happening right now. So then the question is like, do you keep him on the 53-man roster again to keep trying to develop him, or do you give up on him after claiming him and paying him quite a bit of money last season off of what was on his rookie deal and having to sort of eat the rest of his rookie deal if you waive him and no one claims him? But, it just doesn't feel like he's a guy that's reliable. You can rely on in any sort of capacity at this point. Like if he needed to play significant snaps, you wouldn't feel good about where that spot is on your offensive line because it's rough. There are moments, but it would have some concerns. Then, like Ja'Tyre Carter played really well in the first preseason game. Thought he came back to earth a little bit more in this one. And a couple of times just not quite as consistent, not getting as much of a nice power drive in the running game. I think the Colts defensive line was able to play with a little bit better leverage. He certainly didn't play a ton of snaps, so it's not a huge sample size here, but he did get beat at least once or twice in the passing game. I think it's a little bit of stunt communication with Doug Kramer wasn't always great, and Kramer too. Like he was solid against the Titans, and then in this one, some of his lack of I don't want to say like strength. He's not weak, but some of that like core anchoring ability was exposed a little bit in this game, and like. He moves pretty well, but he's not the fastest, and sometimes trying to climb to the second level, he couldn't quite get there where you wanted to, and it just, again, kind of felt like there's a reason he's the third string center on the depth chart, behind Whitehair and Lucas Patrick. I think that's for a reason. Like, we were wondering if maybe a guy like Kramer could start to make this 53-man roster if he kept up the high level of play, but it just felt to me wasn't quite as good in this game, and you got to be really great to be, if you're going to be just a center, not have a lot of guard versatility in this O-line, you really got to be good. So I think Kramer might be practice squad bound again at this point. But the conversation becomes tricky here because, like, okay, we know who the starting 5 linemen are. Braxton Jones, Tevin Jenkins, Cody Whitehair, Nate Davis, Darnell Wright. When healthy, that's the starting 5. And then we know Larry Borum pretty much locked in as a swing tackle. That's your 6th offensive lineman. Lucas Patrick locked in as a backup center / guard. That's 7. Typically, you keep 8, sometimes 9. So then who's the 8 in this group? Is it Ja'Tyre Carter? Is it Alex Leatherwood? As we say, screw it. We'll play Borum or Patrick if we need a backup, but we'll keep Leatherwood just to keep developing him because we still believe in him. I didn't mention Aviante Collins, who was the 5th man of this backup offensive line. He struggled again. I don't think he's got a shot at this point, especially because a guy like Kellen Diesch, the 3rd string offensive tackle, came in and played really well. They took Borum out, kept Collins in, and brought Diesch in with some of the starters, and or some of the backups, the top backups, the 2nd stringers. And I thought Diesch played really, really well. So I don't think Collins has a shot. And I don't think Diesch will make the roster either. So it's a question of like Leatherwood or Carter, I guess. I mean, Collins has guard versatility, so there's a chance that the preseason games are not fully representative of how good he's been at practice. But to me, it kind of comes down to Carter or Leatherwood potentially here for that 8th offensive lineman spot. And maybe you like Leatherwood having some versatility to play tackle, but Carter certainly has been the better of the two, or maybe even Dieter Iselin, because he can play guard and center. Logan Stenberg came in this game off waivers for the Lions. I thought he played pretty well, but short time to prove himself in this preseason. I think that last offensive line spot will be interesting, but I think you can feel all right about Borum being your top backup tackle, Patrick being your top backup interior guy, and then whoever else they keep is kind of a bonus after that for depth that you hope can continue to develop and grow. And if you need to rely on them, hopefully they can give you something a little bit more consistent that way. You can be sure we'll keep a close eye on this Bears offensive line, the young guys on the defensive line, and of course, the quarterback battle right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Really appreciate our everydayers that tune in 5 days a week, getting your daily Bears fix, and of course then your daily opportunity to bear down.